Let's talk about pouring a sun ledge. What kind of concrete do you pour? What is the PSI? I am doing my own Cabo shelf and I'm reading about how cast in place concrete only has 3,000 PSI versus gunite at 9,000.
So on the low end PSI, that's going to be a 5 or 5.5 sack concrete mix. And usually, if your PSI is that low, you're also using round stone versus limestone. If you add limestone to the mix instead of a round stone, you're going to bring the PSI up, but then the more you're going to need more and more Portland cement. If we look at a shotcrete pool is a 7.5 sack per yard mix, and it has very small stones, so there's a lot of surface area for the Portland to adhere to. But clearly, the PSI is coming from the smaller, tighter aggregate and the much higher amount of Portland cement per yard. Because if we look at a 5 sack mix, and here in Michigan, a 5 sack mix is usually what we call our 3,000 PSI, 2,500 to 3,000 PSI footing mix. That's not something that we would use to expose to the elements. We would step it up to at least a 6 sack mix, so it's 6 bags per yard, and use limestone because the limestone doesn't absorb the water, doesn't hold on to the water and then crack when things freeze. So there's at least 1,000 different mix designs in everything you do. What I would do is, if I was pouring in place that sun shelf, I was forming it and pouring it, I would still step way up and do at least a 7 bag mix with smaller aggregate. And if possible, if you can get limestone versus pea stone, that's even going to be better. But I would step the Portland up quite a bit because you really want that PSI as much strength as possible, because if you're in a cold environment or even a really hot environment, there's a lot of flex and movement when temperature changes. And the higher the PSI, PSI that the concrete is, the stronger and the longer it's going to last. Again, the more Portland and the richer your mix, the more expensive the mix is. But the little extra overall is going to be worth the money. It's just the other thing to concern yourself with, though, if you've never poured concrete in these different mixed designs, is they set up at different rates. You have to handle them very differently, and you have to be really careful with admixtures and the things you put in. And a lot of guys try to use reducers to slow it down, and other people use things to speed up the process. I would say just get real clear with whoever's delivering the concrete for you that they're going to give you the product that you really need.